You're entering Corsi Nation.
This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. Today it's Tuesday. It's June 3rd, 2025. Thanks for joining us on CorsiNation.com. You can follow us on X at Corsi Jerome+, CorsiJerome1, and Jerome Corsi PhD.substack.com. That's Substack, Jerome Corsi PhD.substack.com. Okay, now we've got quite a bit to cover today. I want to start out with this story on Russia's terms to Ukraine for the cessation of hostilities and a ceasefire. And this is it's on the last refuge, which is the conservativetreehouse.com. And Ukraine presented President Trump with their term sheets and require a ceasefire. And today, Russia had their term sheets, which clarifies the content of the meetings that were held in the White House, where President Trump assembled his military leadership yesterday and his foreign policy team. And the Russian negotiations in Istanbul is Russia's offering a temporary ceasefire to Ukraine. And Russia's prepared this two-part memorandum proposing a ceasefire and ending the war. And there are several paths, evidently, for the second part of the memorandum for ending the war. The primary terms are in Section 1, which is the settlement of the crisis, and then Section 2, which is ceasefire conditions. And let's review them for a minute, because I think it's the beginning here of an end to this conflict, hopefully. Of course, Europe wants to continue it, and Zelensky's probably dead if he doesn't continue it, because he's got so many conflicts of interest. He's bought millions. Let his wife go on $1 million jewelry buying spree. He's got mansions all over. He's probably got mansion in the United States, maybe a couple. And he is an actor. He's not really a politician. And a dope, on crack cocaine. We covered a story on that earlier. And he's just a mess. And, wanting to continue the money flow, the arms flow, the killing, so he can make money, and so the oligarchs in Ukraine can make money. Okay, so the conditions are, first of all, the international and legal recognition into the Russian Federation of Crimea and these provinces in the eastern part of Ukraine, which Russia occupies. And they want the Ukrainian forces to completely pull out, as well as the paramilitary neo-Nazi groups that Ukraine has in these provinces trying to kill anybody who speaks Russian. They want the neutrality of Ukraine, number two, so Ukraine doesn't join NATO or any other, have foreign troops on soil. It just remains neutral. And all treaties and agreements that are, inconsistent with the remaining neutral are canceled. Ukraine has to be a state without nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction. And I think that would be also the ending of the biolabs that Fauci put into Ukraine. The establishment of maximum limits for the size of Ukrainian military and the quantity of arms. Guarantees of the rights and freedoms and interests of the Russian and Russian-speaking population. Granting the Russian language official status. That one's going to be tough for the Ukrainians, neo-Nazis, to accept. Legislation prohibition of the glorification and propaganda of Nazism and neo-Nazism. Dissolution of nationalist organizations and parties. The lifting of all economic sanctions and bans and restrictive measures between Russia and Ukraine, and not imposing any new ones. The resolutions of issues related to family reunification and displaced persons. A waiver of mutual claims for damages during the hostilities, so no damages. That Ukraine has to stop persecuting the Orthodox Church of Ukraine and the Russian Orthodox Church, and gradual restoration of diplomatic and economic relations. Well, that's a pretty sound proposal. Of course, Zelensky's not in the EU are not going to accept it because they want to have a Russian acknowledgement that Russia has stolen these territories from Ukraine. Okay, even though this goes back to the State Department in 2013 and Hillary Clinton taking money from Pinochet, a Ukrainian oligarch, while she had her foundation, and Bill Clinton was running her foundation and her private email server, so she could conduct Clinton Foundation business and make money for political favors while she was Secretary of State. That's called bribery. Okay, and then the option one is commencement of complete withdrawal of the Ukrainian troops and paramilitary from these regions. And option two is the prohibition on the redeployment of these paramilitary formations, except for movements aimed at withdrawal from the borders of the Russian Federation to a distance agreed upon by both parties. No more mobilization, no more foreign military supplies, no more military third country military presence in Ukraine, guarantees of Ukraine's renunciation of sabotage and subversive activities against the Russian Federation and its citizens, establishment of a bilateral center for monitoring and controlling the ceasefire regime, mutual amnesty for political prisoners and the release of detained civilians, a lifting of martial law in Ukraine, and the dates for the election of a president of Ukraine. Remember, Zelensky canceled the elections. Okay, so President Trump would have to remove U.S. military support, and I think he would be willing to do that. Trump said, "We just had a great talk with our military leaders. It's the strongest military we've ever had, including the fact that we are stockpiling weapons at a rate never seen before by our country. Hopefully, however, we will never have to use them." Okay, so I think you've got here a beginning to a reasonable dialogue, which Zelensky will, of course, reject. And without some coming together in terms that are acceptable to Russia, there's going to be no ending to this war. And Zelensky is going to soon be out of luck, because I think Trump's patience is running thin. I don't think Trump appreciated the stunt Zelensky pulled at the White House, where he kept saying he would sign this agreement on, allowing us to benefit from the rare earth minerals in Ukraine. And then he gets in front of the cameras and he acts up and says he wants a guarantee of, from the United States and others, of the sovereignty of Ukraine, including over the territories that Russia now occupies. This whole war started because Poroshenko and then Zelensky started sending these paramilitary neo-Nazi groups into eastern Ukraine to kill Russian-speaking citizens and end any freedom movement. So I think after the weekend drone attack on the Russian strategic bombing airplanes, which did about $2 billion worth of damage, Putin has not retaliated. Instead, he's offering a reasonable peace deal that, of course, Zelensky will say is outrageous because it doesn't give him back his territory. There's no way in hell that Zelensky's going to get that territory back. Chris, you can come on and comment on this, and let's have a little dialogue. What do you think the ultimate outcome of this is going to be?
If you asked me this a few months ago, when Trump was first occupying or first moving into the Oval Office again for a little while, I would have said this was a little bit closer than it would be now. Every time we see a ceasefire proposal or something get closer to that level, we see Volodymyr Zelenskyy or NATO nations trying to stop it or trying to find ways to say, "Hey, this can't happen." Remember, Russia's the aggressor. That's the PR call right there. Russia's the aggressor. You have to stop them. It's up to you to stop them. And as you know, we talked about this in a recent podcast. The Western Europeans think that Ukraine is a nice buffer to have a proxy war against Russia. Fact is, it's not that much of a buffer because things can get worse. Now that Ukraine and Western Europe open up drone warfare, I'm going down a rabbit hole. The point is, I don't think this is going to happen because Zelensky's ego will always get in the way.
Zelensky's going to have to park his ego, or somebody's going to park Zelensky.
Right.
I mean, he's about to be a dead man walking the way he's behaving.
Right.
And I don't see him acting up like this. This is not a stage. It's not a movie. It's not a television show. And you start messing around with serious politicians and wars in people's lives, it's not going to go down very well. Now, I think that Zelensky has to fear his own oligarchs who are, not wanting the war to end because they like the money flow. And the money is probably disappearing like it usually does in Ukraine through a money laundering system, through private bank and Kolomoisky, or one of the other schemes that Ukraine is fond of doing. Now, I think that the basics here are that this is reality. Russia's proposal is reality. Zelensky and NATO are not going to get back these two provinces without a nuclear war. Russia's occupying them, and the Crimea. Russia's not giving them back, period. That's just reality. And the one point else I want to make, I don't think NATO wants Ukraine as a buffer. They want Ukraine in NATO so they come right to the border with Russia, and they want to be aggressive towards Russia. NATO and Europe are trying to start World War III because their crimes are enormous. They don't want to face up to their crimes, and their countries are broke, which we're going to cover in a minute.
That leads me to a question. Here's something for you. I understand that what was it, Rule 5 or something like that, Statute 5 says if a NATO country is attacked, that means we're all attacked. However, if NATO countries start a war, does that invalidate that rule?
No, there's no provision for NATO starting a war. NATO was meant to be a defensive pact, and
Right,
so
the
therefore,
spirit, but the spirit of the agreement
well,
is NATO countries if they're attacked, not if they're starting a war.
yeah, that's right. I mean, it does not apply to starting a war. In other words, if France starts a war with Russia, we're not compelled to go into it.
Right. I'm sure we'll be pressured, but we don't have to. Yes, that's
No, there's no. I mean, and these treaties are ridiculous anymore. I mean, they at the end of World War II, they were enforced in World War II, so that when Germany attacked Poland, the United Kingdom went to war with Germany. Now, at first, it was a phony war because Germany wasn't really prepared to start attacking UK until it had successfully gotten a hold of the continent, specifically Belgium and France. And so there were months that went by before anything happened, before the Blitz started. And Germany, I believe, would have made an agreement with England and put have the two countries go against Russia. That's what I think Hitler wanted from the very beginning. He didn't really want to go to war with the UK and with the United States. I think he knew he would lose, or he knew it would be a very difficult war. Whereas if he had Great Britain fighting with him against Russia, he had a greater chance of winning. And because Russia was communist and Great Britain at that time was not communist, although today it probably is, and just as the Democratic Party is communist today, and it wasn't in 1945 or 1939, and when the World War II started.
Did you hear Keir Starmer talk tough this week?
Oh yes, I mean it's in Great Britain. These are, well, let's go to the next story, and let me comment, and I'll ask you to come back in a minute. But the next story I wanted to cover is in the it's in the Gatestone Institute, and it's written by Drieu Godefridi, who is, let's see who this is. Let's see who is what is his what are the qualifications here? I'm going to scroll down there. It's a long article. He's a jurist at the St. Louis University of Louvain. He's a philosopher at University St. Louis at the University of Louvain. I guess he's French. A PhD in legal theory from the Sorbonne. An entrepreneur, CEO of a European private education group. And he's author of The Green Reich. Okay, now what he's writing is that Brussels, I just, kind of go skim through a few paragraphs here, that Brussels, the self-proclaimed capital of the European Union, is no longer a beacon of a united Europe, but an advanced symptom of its disintegration. I've been saying that for years. And the EU is done. I mean, I'm sorry, they can hold it together for a while, but the EU is done. It can't dissolve fast enough to please me. I mean, this EU is a monstrosity, globalism. So the normalization of radical Islam and the anti-Semitic discourse that is in Brussels as a result of 15 years abrogating the responsibility. So Brussels is basically set itself up as the center of protracted European unrest. Now, it's because of the Islamicists and the radical Islam that has now taken over Europe. And you see as a result, the crime rates are rising. You're having these attacks of not only robberies and pickpocketing and murders, but rapes and other sexual crimes committed by the Muslims against the citizens of Brussels. And this is happening in really, I'd say, all the countries in which Islam is flourishing throughout Europe. And it comes along with Jew hatred, so which they say is anti-Zionism, as if Zionism means that somehow or other they're saying the Jews could be the only religion. Well, it's anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, pure and simple. So as of 2023, 74% of Brussels' population is of foreign background compared to about 10% of the European average. And this is what they call the Great Replacement. So 35% of young people with an immigrant background in Brussels were living in households where nobody has a job, which is a formula for delinquency and radicalization. They want to live on the government dole. And Islam is not a very productive society for work. So what you're seeing is that the structural politics of Europe as a whole are now deadlocked because this undiscussed and unadmitted Islamic function that wants to be separate and wants to separate out of the structure of Europe is dominant. And so, the rise of Islam and the destruction of Christianity in Europe is, I think, one of the major stories of this decade. And it's developing, I think, throughout the remainder of the 2020s. You're going to see these European countries suffer what we just saw in France, which is widespread rioting, violence, burning, destruction, because the Islamicists, as they gain in numbers, are going to want to have Sharia law, and we're going to want to take over, and they're not going to assimilate. And so therefore it happened before. Europe was dominated in the early part of the I guess about 500 or so, because by Muslims. And you think of Fatima, for instance, in Portugal, where the Virgin appeared to the three children in 1917, which is a major event in the Catholic religion, the appearances of Virgin Mary, the Mother of Christ. Fatima is the name of, I guess, the sister of Muhammad, or one of the family of Muhammad. But Fatima is not a Christian name, it's an Islamic name. And so therefore it witnesses the Islamic takeover of Europe, which occurred in those years. I'll just hear Google a couple things. Islamic takeover of Europe, 1500s, I'd say. Yeah, so Muslim control, basically, of Spain and Portugal came to an end with what they called the Reconquista, which was a long process of Christian reconquest. By 1492, the last Muslim-ruled territory in Spain and Portugal, which was the Emirate of Granada, was captured by Catholic monarchs. Islam had spread throughout Europe and through the Iberian Peninsula during the 8th century, was largely confined to Iberia by 1500. Okay, so that's, I think, key, and we do forget it, that in fact Islam was dominant in Europe at one time before, and it led to a war essentially to get rid of Islam when the Christians finally decided they were sick of them and drove them out of Europe. Well, now Islam's back in Europe, and it again is going through the same kind of thing that we saw before, and it's going to lead to the same economic ruin. Europe wants war because Europe thinks if it has a war industry, it can get people back to work. The problem is you can't have a green energy economy and have a war footing in the country. Chris, want to come back and comment? I mean, this seems to me to be a typical final, the globalist view is that we should have, Europe should fight Russia, should have a war against Russia, and then, destroy Europe, and then globalists take over with a one world government.
Well, this is an interesting conundrum for the globalists. They're right now fighting on a few fronts. They thought that the main anti-globalist fronts would be in Russia and China. Those are two nations that kind of want to take over the world. Russia dating back to the Cold War days, obviously a different set of government, or a different set of leadership at the time. But now they're fighting a lot of other fronts at this point. The globalists find themselves now trying to maintain a proxy war with anti-globalist Russia, finding out that factions within the EU in and of itself are anti-globalist, including a lot of the rank and file people within major globalist countries. Now they find the U.S. is anti-globalist. So, or at least of the majority of the U.S. vote, or let's just say enough of the U.S. voters to vote in an anti-globalist leadership is anti-globalist. And again, I'm trying to kind of being a little. I'm kind of saying this in a roundabout way, but the fact is,
you're kind of going in circles.
Right. But the circle is important because I'm going in a sphere. They are right now fighting politically on several fronts. But
Yes,
they're
they
still
are.
trying to elevate the war against Russia because they want to keep power. Why the Eurozone became the EU? Because old Europe was jealous of the power that's been rising in the new world, and now it's getting worse for them. And they're
you can't unify these countries in Europe.
Right, you can't.
You
They're
can't, you
different
can't
cultures.
eliminate national sovereignty.
The only way to do that is to eliminate the opposition, and they've
The only
tried.
way to do this Europe is to eliminate the Europeans, which they're in the process of doing.
Right. They are doing that. They're also eliminating or trying to eliminate opposition. They've been throwing anybody to the right of Macron in jail, basically, or disqualifying them for presidencies, or
We're
destroying.
disqualifying them from existing.
Right.
I mean, they don't want. They don't. So it's intolerant. Okay, so the globalism ends up, and where in the I've written 2 of the books of a trilogy I plan to write, and the third book I have not yet written. The first book was you can show them, Chris, the Truth About Energy, Global Warming, and Climate Change, which did very well. And I was arguing that this pseudoscience was designed to get us not to use hydrocarbon fuels because it was really an attack on capitalism. And if you destroy capitalism, you destroy the modern industrial state, and billions of people will die because you can't feed them. Okay, and that's the real point behind. Then the next book, which was The Truth About Anti-Marxism, Global Cultural Maoism, and Anarchy, which was that the whole philosophy of globalism was based on a morphing of Marxism into attack on the capitalist culture, culminating in the Frankfurt School of Marcuse, who said it would all be accomplished by uninhibited sex. So sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and here we are, with the family destroyed and traditional values destroyed, and a value relativistic system. The third book I want to write is going to be on this transhumanism, the artificial intelligence and perpetual life extension, and this whole idea that we can become a superhuman race. That's the goal. So I'll write the third book. Hopefully I can get started on it later this year or the beginning of next year, God willing. And but we're in a political philosophy which motivates the politics, and the philosophy that's been dominant is politics of nihilism and destruction, based on the premise that you have to destroy everything that's traditional in order to establish this utopia that the globalists want to create for the transhumans, namely their self-elected little selves. Chris?
No, that's absolutely true. And you're watching, you're watching the way the globalists are trying to are still trying to fight for their last bit of power, and they're doing it a little bit more subtly. You see a lot of some of these U.S. cities trying to find a way to become smart cities. Let's go to congestion pricing. This is not just about the MTA and its failures and, of course, its mismanagement over the years. It's also about taking a small portion of Manhattan where extremely wealthy people live, keeping more people off the road, and again, they didn't just do this by using congestion pricing. They thinned out the roads. They offered they put in a bike lane. They made congestion much worse that way. They've taken cars off other certain roads or certain blocks in New York City.
They've also
This is
dedicated bus
right.
lanes. They've done everything they
Yep.
can to restrict traffic in New York.
Exactly. To create, and again, that's a perfect, let's say, dimensions or geographics for a 15-minute or a small 15-minute smart city.
Well, yeah,
That's
everybody
what
has
we're
to
looking at.
walk or take a bicycle. They've got
Right.
bicycles around, okay? So you can rent the bicycles.
And the LA 2028 proposal was making it a smarter city, a more green energy type city.
Yeah.
There's a smart city experiment in the Middle East. I forgot exactly where it is. I don't remember which country it is, but
So
there was
you can't do
it
anything in a
died.
smart city, right?
The city died.
Yeah,
It-
well,
yeah.
that's what they intended to do, and that's the whole point of this. Is it's all about death and destruction, and the entire dynamic of what we're seeing play out in Ukraine is, I think, hopefully the death of this satanic idea, which is anti-human, anti-people. That this place would be good if except for the people. If you get rid
Masdar
of the people,
City.
it'll be just fine.
It was Masdar City.
The Masdar city that disintegrated.
Well, it was supposed to be the first carbon zero or net zero city. Yeah, it's basically not doing well.
I would think not. Okay, let's cover a couple more things. The gold today is at $3,000, $3,354. That's holding above $3,300. It's almost at $3,400. We're getting new highs on gold, and people are not listening or at least I'm not reaching enough people. I'm still being suppressed on YouTube and on all these other channels, and I'm going to try to fight that through the remainder of this year. But the point is that gold is not going down. Gold is going to now hit, I think, $4,000 an ounce, and I've been telling you this for quite some time. I started talking about this, gold was about $1,800 an ounce, and silver's over $32 an ounce. It's now $34.33 an ounce. So again, I'm going to stress going to Swiss America, and Chris, show the free book that people can get by calling the 800 number, because how the coming global crash, and it's coming, is going to create a historic gold rush. Call 1-800-519-6268. You can get a copy of the book free. You can talk about a self-directed IRA, where you can get a depository account in Delaware, at a depository institution where you can actually physically hold your gold and silver in your IRA or your 401k. It's tax deferred in that setting, which means you're going to earn even more from it because you're not paying taxes on the appreciation as it appreciates. Okay, and then you get a Lloyd's of London insurance policy guaranteeing that the gold and silver is really there. It'll all be set up for you by Swiss America. 1-800-519-6268. You get the free book. And also, if you call now, while this offer still lasts, you can get the Walking Liberty $50 offer. Buy 250 of these coins at really the price of what they're worth as silver. They're about almost 99%, 99.999 points silver. I mean, they're silver, real silver, not like the cheap coins we're minting today, which are basically trash. Of course, the dollar's trash, so the coins are trash, and the money's trash. And that's the problem with staying in dollars. You're going to find that the stock market could be trading as low, I'm warning you, as 35,000 on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which means there will be trillions of dollars and capital worth that would just simply vanish. And if you don't get out of a sale before, when the market's going down, if you don't get out early, you're not going to be able to recover your losses until you wait till that market comes back. Look at Swiss America. There's a lot of offerings, 1-800-519-6268, but don't wait. Even if you don't have a lot of money in your IRAs, transfer some of it into gold and silver now. At least you'll have an asset that's appreciating, while your mutual funds, either stock funds or bond funds in your IRAs, lose their purchasing power, because the dollar in which they're denominated is losing its purchasing power. Pretty simple. Also look at My Vital C, where that's another one of our sponsors. If you like the show, look at our sponsors. My Vital C, I take it every day. It's carbon 60. It's atom was discovered about 40 years ago at Rice University, group of scientists, and it's a single, the nucleus is surrounded by 60 carbon atoms in a cage structure like a soccer ball. They call these fullerenes after Buckminster Fuller. And I wrote a book here, which is Live Longer and Better. And I wrote that with Chris Burries, who is the lead scientist and co-founder of My Vital C. And he was on the student team that figured out how to produce carbon 60 for the scientists after they discovered it, and then figured out how to make it soluble so you could consume carbon 60 and have it become an antioxidant, which does many things for your immune system. It kills these free radicals, which are going around in your body and are very destructive. You want to make sure you've got antioxidants. Also, it improves your sleep. There's My Vital C, carbon 60 for cats and dogs. They love it. There's hair products, there's skin products. Take a look at My Vital C on CorsiNation.com. Okay, now the last story I want to cover here today is the FBI and Mueller's team are now releasing documents when they realize that Mueller's investigation had produced really sufficient evidence that the General Flynn was forced into a guilty plea after they withheld Brady material. In other words, they withheld material from General Flynn that would have helped him exonerate himself. And in particular, what they withheld was the fact that this Nellie Orr, who was married to one of the FBI officials, was a Russian expert, and she was working with the Steele dossier to supply lies into it on Trump. That was the basis of the whole Russian collusion, was the Steele dossier. And Hillary Clinton also paid for the Steele dossier through her law firm, Perkins Coie. She laundered the money, so it didn't look like Hillary was paying for the Steele dossier, even though the source of the money that Perkins Coie put into the Steele dossier was Hillary Clinton's money from her campaign. So lies, 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 and damn lies. Now, when President Trump began declassifying some of this, and the binder that the FBI was going after, this was essentially wanting to get hold of the FBI, getting hold of this missing secret blind binder in which a lot of the damaging evidence implicating Obama's CIA, his FBI, and initiating the Russian collusion hoax against Trump, that binder contains a lot of the damaging information. Now, Kash Patel has announced that the FBI has uncovered a trove of hidden Russiagate documents, and they're going to be released soon. Okay, now I can't wait for this because I was part of this investigation too, and they wanted to put me in prison because they said I had a tie to Julian Assange, which I did not have. It was the last real witness before the committee, the Mueller investigation. The FBI and the prosecutors quizzed me for 40 hours. I did not have a tie to Julian Assange. I did figure out in 2016 during the campaign that Julian Assange had Podesta's emails that he was going to release right before the election. I pretty well knew what was in those emails because I knew Podesta. I knew how I watched Podesta and studied Podesta. Didn't ever know him personally, never met him or spoke to him, but watched him and studied him. And I could tell that he knew that Hillary was a lousy campaigner, that she had a physical ailment which caused her to have, kind of epileptic fits, blackouts, and that she was lazy, nasty, and that she and Perkins Coie had violated Federal Election Commission rules with the scheme where they raised more money because they were going to give it to the state Democratic parties. They gave the money to the state Democratic parties, followed the rules, and they took the money back from the state Democratic parties and put it in Hillary's campaign, which again is a violation of the law. Clever scheme, but it was designed in order to violate the limits on campaign spending that were in the law. Of course, the law doesn't mean much to these Democrats because they break the laws willy-nilly. When we get these documents, and what happened to me was that the FBI said you either tell us who your tie is to Assange, because we believe you knew so much you had to have a tie to Assange. I didn't. I couldn't invent someone for them to be a tie when there was none. No one introduced me to Assange. Assange said I had no contact with him. The FBI just didn't believe that. They thought maybe when I was in Italy, I contacted somebody in Italy that told me all about Assange. That never happened. So the FBI threatened to bring me before a jury, would find me guilty in Washington, D.C., and imprison me the rest of my life, or I could take a plea deal and say I had a tie to Julian Assange that I hid to protect Donald Trump. Well, I decided to reject the plea deal. I thought they'd put me in prison the rest of my life. I thought, and I was willing to go. I could not imagine standing before a judge and God and swearing to a lie. So they did not indict me. They closed the Mueller investigation. And now when we get these documents, I'm going to press for making sure some of these criminals who conducted the Russian collusion investigation to destroy Donald Trump, I want them prosecuted for their criminal activity. I want to end just with a real quick summary of a couple of different stories I'm following. One is that, by the way, Ukraine has just attacked the Kerch Bridge in Crimea with underwater explosives. So, this is the third time that bridge has come under attack. Zelensky's doing everything he can to bait Putin into attack so he can have World War III. Okay, so let's wrap this up today. I'm already getting phone calls. It's time to get going. In the end, God always wins. God's going to win here too. As Dr. Jerome Corsi, we're doing Corsi Nation broadcasts every weekday. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow. God bless.